I'm going to talk about everyday life and the kind of opportunities for companies to understand everyday life and adapt business to that. Basically, my whole career, I've been extremely passionate about understanding the normal, the kind of everyday life, the kind of mundane life of people, because I think from a business perspective, it's still kind of mass market products are still developed for normal situations, for everyday life of people. Which means also that my presentation will be quite conservative in that sense, because I believe also that there are a lot of kind of stable things in everyday life that we can still build innovation on top of still today. Me, myself, I'm a Swedish-speaking Finn, so if you wonder about the accent, so that's where it comes from. So, and by the way, a comment to one of the earlier presentations. Personally, I don't believe that number of engineers is a dimension of innovation in the world, but that's, that's just my view. Okay, so I'm going to speak about everyday life, as said already. First, how do we think about consumers in companies today? Personally, I feel that marketing textbooks and textbooks that I have been reading in university when I have been studying and business schools and so are extremely harmful. Because how we learn about kind of how we should do market research and how we should understand consumers, it's a lot about actually digging deep into the minds of people. So we are all familiar of concepts as kind of understanding attitudes, values, perceptions, preferences, and so on. Whereas my point of view is very much that everything is practical. So if we want to come up with an innovation here today, I think we would need to go into the kind of practical situations, the context of everyday life, what is really happening there, and kind of build and adapt to those kind of practices that people have. And this is something that is a lot of companies, especially big companies, are still suffering from, this kind of old paradigm of thinking about consumers as being thinkers, when I would at least like to see the market as a bunch of practitioners. And the reason why I'm saying this is that, especially if you are kind of representing a technology company, as I do here, I think technology is always practical. So if technology is not valuable in practical situations, I think it's not worth anything, basically. So we are not consuming anyway with our heads or our minds or our attitudes. We are always kind of consuming technology as a part of some kind of very practical situation. And I think that's kind of, as a mindset, extremely important for us to understand, especially as I'm also working in Nokia as kind of anthropologist and trying to kind of somehow display for the company that, okay, how should we actually take our technology, embed it into practical situations in everyday life. We do a lot of, or I do a lot of global ethnography, anthropology. So we go around the globe and try to get into the everyday life of people. And we do it on all different income levels. So we're trying to see that what is really the kind of practices of extremely poor people, what are the kind of practices of people that have more resources as a part of their everyday life. And the first thing I learned when I did this, went first to Indonesia, India, China, to Finland, where I come from, and so on, is that the world is actually surprisingly similar around the globe. So the way we are actually kind of doing things on a practical level, the way we are kind of conducting our family life, the way we are kind of interacting with our friends, the way we are actually working, the way we are doing different things is surprisingly similar. So I think there's a lot of talk about the world being extremely fragmented and people being like the postmodern society, everything being kind of extremely difficult to understand and so on. I think that's bullshit. Because at the end of the day, we are human beings and we're actually kind of performing our lives in quite similar ways. What is, however, different is that we all have very different kinds of resources. So if you don't have money, you don't simply have the resources to actually do things in using specific tools and so on. But still, the kind of practices lying there behind is quite similar, and people are, especially with less money, extremely innovative to come up with their own solutions for kind of performing their everyday life. What we have done especially much anthropology on, and that's what I'm going to speak more about here today, is about social. So we all know that we are going through a social revolution globally for the time being. And what we have done is that we have then tried to look at what is social actually from an anthropological point of view. And we have identified that there are basically, universally, globally, there are 4 different kinds of social relationships that people have. And this is interesting because this is a source for innovation for all of us. So the first one being, all of us have some kind of long-term relationships that we would like to have relationships for the whole life with certain people. So it can be very good friends, our kind of family members, and so on. And with these people, we are actually kind of sharing the everyday in that sense, because we are so attached to these people that we are actually totally displayed for them. Then we have friendships also. Friendships are actually, if you really look about what is being friends, it's usually about kind of having some kind of joint experience with people. So with friends, you are not usually kind of displaying everything. You are not sharing everything, but you are actually, in most cases, you are preparing for certain events, then you are living, sharing certain events, and then you might be memorizing certain events afterwards. Then we also have something which we call purposeful relationships. So instead of necessarily only being friends, you have certain common interests. So you are not actually kind of getting relationships between people because you are interested in the people, but because you are interested in some kind of content, some kind of objects that you are interested in. For instance, we have a purposeful relationship here today. And then the 4th kind of relationship that people tend to have also is something which we call incidental. It's when you are happening to meet strangers, when strangers meet each other. And when we look at these 4 different relationships from a technology point of view, I think you will start to understand the potential we have still in social. Because it's easy so when we know that we have like Facebook, we have Twitters, we have all kinds of social applications out there, we somehow feel that the kind of social is already kind of invented somehow. But none of these, and actually very few of these relationships that I was just kind of briefly explaining here, are somehow kind of optimally served by technology. So there's a lot of kind of potential out there. And what I'm going to speak a little bit more about is this so-called long-term relationships, because that's typically something where technology hasn't been a very important part. But that is also changing. In long-term relationships, there's a lot of things, existing things that are extremely important for people to actually interact with each other. So I'm going to use the example of families here. And my point is going to be that there's universal objects that are social out there that is very important. So traditionally, TV, for instance, has been always, at least in Western societies, somehow the kind of symbol of evil somehow, symbol of kind of the non-social life, because people are becoming passive and just watching TV. If you do anthropology around the globe, you can actually see that TV is actually one of the few really social objects. TV is actually one of the things that actually pull people together. You can share an experience of actually watching something together, and it's not even unnormal that you actually speak to each other while you are watching TV, and so on. So TV is actually social and an important part of social. Another example is what is social, and what, of course, there are the digital representations of this also, which are important, is certain forms of collections of memories. And that's something you see globally wherever you go into a home of people. They have some sorts of collages, some sort of collections, pictures and memories of the history of these relationships that they have. So here is a presentation of a collage in a Chinese home. Here is from UK, actually exactly the same. Here we have the family album, which is still perceived as many people in these close relationships to be the kind of optimal user interface for actually scanning memories. But still, there are a lot of new opportunities also, and that's my whole point here, that we can kind of imitate these traditional objects and we can make digital versions that are better of what we already have. So here we have an example of a lady who has done a video piece on her parents' storytelling about her own kind of past and making actually the kind of next version of a family album that was kind of before the paradigm for sharing memories. So what I'm saying is that mixing media and kind of using these kind of technologies that we have is kind of improving those kind of shared things that we have had for ages in our relationships. Another typical object that we can see globally is we have a family calendar here on the wall. That is a collaboration space for people. Actually, no matter resources. So if you would have a lot of money, you are still using the paper calendar as the collaboration platform for the family, because no technology has yet made the better version of this kind of very tangible way of collaborating inside a family. Another example of an important thing for long-term relationships is the point with events, family events. That's also something that I think that we will see kind of digital ways of kind of almost improving family events. Here we have an Indonesian graduation party, a picture of that. Anyway, I can see my time is ending here, so I will skip a couple of these photos and get to the point. So, what I think as an anthropologist working for a technology company, what I'm trying to represent is, in a way, conservatism in that sense. That I think there are actually very few new things that emerge over time, historically. So all the things we are seeing, there has been some kind of versions existing before. And what I was just kind of presenting here is also that I'm pretty sure that there will be always improved, better versions of the TV, of the family calendar, of the memories, and all of these kind of objects that people are sharing. So my point of my presentation here is that, although it might be a little bit radical, I'm saying that innovation is not radical from a consumer point of view. We are actually, if we're studying innovation very closely, it's actually extremely incremental. So, for instance, the mobile phone